Welcome to the HSC lecture series. This particular video will look at HSC business studies and how to best prepare for that exam. There's two videos in the series. This video, video 1, will look at the structure of the business studies exam, how to best perform in the business studies exam, and we'll look at ways to revise different types of study methods, memory techniques, and how to address the glossary terms that are given in questions in the exam. Then finally, there will be some resource help and how to access resources to help you with your study. Video 2 in the series will look specifically at exam technique. So the 4 sections of the exam, the multiple choice short answers, report and case study. We'll look at breaking down each section, what are typical questions in those sections from past exams, little tricks in how to answer those questions and how to best prepare for them. This video will also look at sample answers and feedback from NESA and the marking centres of how students went and what the strengths of answers were by students and what some of the areas that students would need to improve upon. So let's get started. The HSC is a marathon and you are halfway through that marathon. And like any marathon, the best approach would be for you to prepare well and to have a steady and consistent approach. And then we sort of build up towards that final HSC exam with a big finish, hopefully. So at the moment, you're in term 2, and you've probably just come back to school for face-to-face teaching. And in this time of term 2, you would be obviously completing your coursework and looking at assessments. So some of you might have upcoming assessments. So the focus would be around doing well in those assessments and understanding, getting through the course content. Term 3, you're building up towards your trial HSC exams, and this is a major part of your assessment. And then once that's done, we move into term 4 and in preparation for the HSC exam. And just last week, it was announced that the HSC exam will be put back by 5 days. So there's an extra period of time that you're able to prepare for these exams. So the idea is you're consistently building towards that finish and you're taking care of assessment tasks and learning coursework as you go. All right, the HSC Business Studies exam has 4 main topics: operations, financial management, marketing, and human resource management. Each of those sections are equally treated, and there will be questions from each of those sections in the HSC exam. The next thing that you need to consider when preparing for the HSC exam is the syllabus. And what you have in front of you there are the Learn To components of the syllabus. Now, I know lots of students prepare really well on the syllabus, but only looking at the Learn About. So this comes at the top of the syllabus after the outcomes, and these are areas that students or questions that students should be able to do. So if we look at the first one there, it says describe the features of operations management for businesses in a tertiary industry. So this potentially could be a question as it appears here, or different variations of it. We look at the second one, assess the relationship between operations and the other key business functions into actual businesses. You'll see when we look at video 2 and past paper questions, this notion of the relationship between areas of the course within a topic has been tested in the last few years. And in particular, this dot point looks at this notion of interdependence, which is a major part of the course that students should be preparing well on. Now, last 2 dot points you can see are around the strategies. So in each of the topics, the advice is you would need to prepare well on the strategies for each of the topics. This one here is asking how operations strategies, so things like outsourcing, total quality management, would help a business to sustain its competitive advantage. So it's a specific look at strategies linked to this notion of, what is your business doing better than similar businesses? And finally, again, this recommendation of strategies. And we'll have a look at these glossary verbs a little bit later in the video, but that's a higher order verb where you're giving reasons for potential strategies in a business. The marketing topic, the learn to, we can see again, there's reference to strategy. So the marketing strategies, this time it's an evaluation. And the evaluation means making a judgment. We've got analysing a marketing plan. I know some schools as assessments, they get students to do marketing plans or part plans as part of their assessment tasks. But don't be put off by the plan, because all it's asking you to do is the marketing processes. That's the planning part. There hasn't been a question specifically asking about a plan, but this is something that you could be tested on. But there's been plenty of questions around the processes of marketing. And finally, explaining how globalization has affected the marketing management. Globalization is a key component of the HSC course in all topics, and this is looking at how globalization affects the marketing management. Now, just a point here, because sometimes students look at marketing management and they think, oh, what is marketing management? Now, the simple answer means any aspect of marketing, but I direct students towards the strategies. It looks easier when you assess past questions, that if they're asking you to look at an impact or respond to an effect, to something like globalization and how the marketing management is affected by that, I think it's easier to look at the strategies, okay? So in this one here, just simply, globalization is breaking down the barriers between countries and increased trade. So you would look at that and how the marketing of a company has responded, okay, in terms of the strategy. So that could be e-marketing as a strategy has been a response to globalization, or global branding, for example, is a key response to being able to access new markets overseas. All right, let's move on. The finance topic. There are 4 learn to components here. You must be able to calculate financial ratios, so that's a given, and these questions pop up all the time in multiple choice and short answer. The next one's looking at how the performance can be assessed using comparative ratio analysis. So that means, are you able to compare financial data between years, say 2017, 2018? Are you able to compare between different businesses? And the one that seems to come up more regular than the others is comparing against a standard or an industry average. The next point there is recommending strategies to improve financial performance. So again, knowing your financial strategies well is a key component. And again, being able to recommend, it's going beyond just saying what the strategy is, but giving reasons for using that strategy in that particular context. And then we've got the ethical component and ethical reporting of financial data. Our final topic is human resources, and there's 4 learn to components here. The first one starts with the important interdependence. I always say to students, you should know really well how the different topics connect to each other, and being explicit and detailed on that would be very good preparation. In terms of what you would need to know in interdependence, you could potentially be asked a case study 20-mark question on interdependence. There was one in recent times in the business report, but this could be an area that you could potentially have to write a whole case study response to interdependence. The second point there is about negotiating enterprise and collective agreements. So when you get to the HR topic, there's a whole section about disputes and industrial disputes within the workplace. and within business, and then how to resolve those disputes. Advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing. So this is another connection to operations, that outsourcing is a strategy in operations, but it's also under the role of human resource management and this whole notion of accessing workers from overseas. And finally, recommending appropriate strategies in HR. The HR topic is the only one that has effectiveness criteria attached to it. So that's things like absenteeism, staff turnover, level of disputation. When you learn that, the good thing about that section of the course is that that helps you to evaluate, because evaluate means to make a judgment, and using those syllabus points, you are then able to use that to help you evaluate with the use of criteria, and that obviously would be the criteria. All right, so you would know by now that there's a repetitive structure to the HSC course, and the word RIPS refers to the 4 components that are in every single topic. So as you can see here under operations, we'll look at the role, the influences, the processes, and the strategies. So I guess it's been designed that way to help students remember aspects of the course and place those under the specific topics there. The only exception there would be, and I'll just move this out of the way, is the effectiveness component that goes with HR. And I've just mentioned that, but you can see that each topic has the 4 areas and HR has the additional area there. All right, let's move on. The format of the HSC exam. Okay, so you should know that the HSC exam is broken into 4 sections. Section 1, 20 multiple choice questions there, worth 20 marks. And the timing of the 35 minutes is just a mathematical calculation of 1.8 minutes per mark. So if you look at it in a way that the exam is out of 100, this section is out of 20, you should spend about 1/5 of the time, and that's the 35 minutes. However, as we know, and when we look at the next video, we'll look at ways of getting through the multiple choice a little bit quicker, and therefore you can save a little bit of time in this section. But the advice is not to rush and make mistakes, because at the end of the day, this whole section is worth the equivalent of the case study that appears in section 4. Section 2 of the paper is our short answer questions, totaling 40 marks. Now it's got here, you could get 4 to 6 short answer questions. So the 4 would typically mean 1 from each topic, and the total of each question would be 10 marks, okay? But in the last few years, typically they're using 5 lots of short answer questions. And we're talking about like an A, B, C component there in the short answer. So just be prepared that there's not necessarily 4 questions, 1 on each topic. There could be an extra 2 sections there. And again, the hour and 15 minutes is calculated because of 40% of the time. And again, work quickly, or work efficiently through this section, but you may have some time up your sleeve if you're able to answer those questions pretty well and effectively. There's 12 parts approximately in total. All right, the business studies report, section 3. You must write a report. You must write in report format. It has stimulus material attached to it that you'll need to refer to, and we'll look at that later on. 20 marks, 35 minutes. Most students, if they're saving a bit of time in section 1 and 2, would spend about 40 to 45 minutes in this particular report. The questions can come from any of the 4 topics. The thing to note here, there will only be 2 topics tested. So 2 tested in the report. The 2 that are not tested would be in the extended response. So for example, if the report had a marketing component and a finance component, then the extended response would have HR and operations. Okay. Approximate length, we're looking at 800 words, okay, which is roughly 6 pages of writing. Most important part here, you address all parts to the question that are given and that you're integrating the stimulus material. The extended response, also known as the case study question, 20 marks. And again, you're probably spending around 40 to 45 minutes with a bit of time saved earlier in the paper. As we've mentioned, it's 2 questions and it comes from 2 different topics. So you have a choice there of 2 questions. And again, the approximate length is 800 words. So that's just a recap of what I've said in terms of the suggested time allocation. So the advice is, work efficiently, but don't rush in those first 2 sections, and you'll have a little bit of time up your sleeve extra for the last 2 sections. All right, so let's have a look at how to best perform in the HSC exam. So the most important part of your revision and preparation is around the syllabus document. I would imagine you've got that document, you've got a copy of that document, and you're constantly looking at that document, referring to it, particularly when you're making notes, etc. Maybe at school when the teacher's going through the course, you're highlighting, you're marking off that you've done that part of the course. All right, so we're saying to use things like flashcards, acronyms, mnemonics, peer testing, rote learning. All right, so the idea here is that you're learning specific parts of the syllabus by using these memory techniques, and we'll have a look at those a little bit later. We've already mentioned the idea about the RIPs in terms of the structure of each topic, and in looking at understanding the interdependence between business functions. So we've already mentioned about that as a part of preparing, looking at the glossary of terms that'll come up soon, and the whole idea of planning. And in the second video, that video starts with how to use your planning time and how to plan during the first part of the exam. Another way of preparing for exams is to practice your paragraph writing. So the idea is, instead of writing whole reports and case study responses, that you would be breaking that down and looking at particular questions and writing a paragraph on that, and then seeing whether you're on track on that, and getting feedback would be pretty important. All right, this next section will look at the science of revision. There was a really good article a few years ago, which was written by The Guardian, in terms of looking at pupils and how to revise more effectively for exams. There was an extensive study done, and the results found that there's a few areas where students could improve upon, and we'll have a look at those now. So number one, the importance of not missing breakfast, particularly going to school, having energy, and this notion that your attention span and ability to recall information really does come from having breakfast each morning, and basically having good balanced meals when you are revising. The second one, an obvious one about the phone. They're definitely a distraction. They're a distraction when you're preparing for exams or assessments. They're distractions when you're at home just doing your revision and homework. So the idea would be to put those away, to not have that particular distraction. In revision, hopefully you've started preparing for the HSC exam by looking at the revision of the topics that you're studying at the moment. And the best advice is that you're spreading that over time, that you are constantly chipping away at your revision, and you're doing more than just the homework that the teacher might be giving you, that you're going back and you're revising past content, and you're doing that in small chunks. And the idea is that you're locking that into your long-term memory. Another technique that is often used is this idea of teaching yourself, okay? So you're able to, I guess, recall information better and, sorry, testing yourself, that is. And that would be looking at quizzes and practice papers during your study sessions, etc. And we'll have a little bit more look at that past paper preparation in terms of testing yourself. This is the teaching one, which is another aspect of memory and preparing for exams. You know, it's a skill to be able to recall information and to teach someone else that information. And it definitely does help to lock that information into long-term memory. There was some suggestion about highlighters not being that effective, particularly students that are highlighting lots and lots of notes on the page. It sort of loses its effect. Not sure what you think about number 7 in listening to music. But again, the research is showing that a quiet environment is the best for recall. I know some students think that they probably prepare better by having their headphones on and listening to music, something to consider. Number 8 there, getting out and exercising, getting some fresh air, having regular breaks definitely is important. And our final one is regular sleep patterns. You know, can't stress how much benefit you will have for your well-being and just your ability to focus, etc., by having regular sleep patterns. All right, so they're sort of general areas for revision, but let's have a look at the best methods of study. Okay, so we've broken these down into looking at study notes. Everybody prepares study notes for different topics. It's just the way that you're going to put those notes together. So business studies, obviously you'll follow your textbook, your notes in class, etc. But one of the things you might consider is putting a little bit of a twist to those notes. A lot of the time, the notes are just content driven in terms of descriptions, characteristics, learning, you know, what the ideas are. And when you do the exam, they're asking you to interpret those notes. So I've seen in the past students actually construct their study notes with things like advantages and disadvantages columns that they've made up themselves, you know, looking at the effect, having the case study integrated into those notes that reinforces what that content is about. Okay, we've mentioned about the syllabus already and basically learning and making sure you've covered each part. This notion of manageable chunks or chunking. So when you're going to revise these study notes that you have, you might look at specific sections of the syllabus. So say, for example, marketing processes, you might spend your time just looking at that component and sort of locking that in first. All right. So instead of trying to study large amounts of work, we just focus in on doing regular study, smaller parts of the syllabus and locking those into our long-term memory. All right, past papers, very important part. You know, every student that I asked, you know, after they've done the HSC, that have done really well in the HSC, and I'll say, what's the, you know, the best method of preparation? And a lot of these things we're doing today, they'll mention, but the number one response typically is around past paper revision. And that gives you a sense of confidence. You know, if you do lots of revision and you see lots of different questions, when you get into that HSC exam, it's almost like I've seen that question before. It gives you that confidence to answer the question. Okay. And we'll look at the technique of past papers and what the benefit there. Another one is to learn the syllabus. There's a syllabus closed passage. You might have seen these around. Teachers create these all the time. So basically by removing different components of the syllabus and having you fill those in regularly, and I'll show you a sample, it's coming up, and sample answers from the NESA site. And in video too, lots of different sample answers. You can get access to those. There's different HSC Success 1 books around that have sample answers. There's the NESA sample answers that the libraries carry and also your schools carry as well. So the sample answers, they're very important for two things. One, to show you the standard of writing. And number two is how to answer the questions. And also, you might also be able to find some additional content, things that you might not have known, and you can add those to your notes. All right, so the memory techniques that we're looking at here is mnemonics or acronyms. Now, an acronym is just, taking the first letter of a word, and sometimes it makes a word that we might be able to remember. So in the marketing section of the syllabus, marketing processes, the word SMEDI, the first letter stands for a different component of the processes, so situational analysis and marketing, market research, etc. And you would remember that, and that would trigger to the brain that that acronym relates to a specific content area. We've mentioned about teaching others and the benefits of that. Visual guides and posters. I know lots of students have up in their room, they have an A3 copy of the syllabus. They might have mind maps of the topic they're studying at the moment. And it's just that, subconscious, that it's there and that it's helping you to remember aspects of the course. So with our memory techniques, we've mentioned about the syllabus closed passage and the mnemonics and acronyms, and this is a good way of remembering the syllabus. At the end of the day, like, you need to know the syllabus document in detail. So we'll have a look at a bit of a sample now. So this is just a screenshot here of the syllabus closed passage I'm talking about. You can do these yourself. Like I said, they're around, but basically you take the syllabus document and you can get it in a Word form from Nessa, and you can just delete words or part words. And the idea would be that repetitively you would go through and you would just continually work on filling these out. So we look at here, it's marketing processes, section 3, situational analysis, and that's broken into a SWOT, product lifecycle. And then the second component is the market research, establishing marketing objectives, identifying target markets, and developing marketing strategy, etc. So you would just go through and work on that. Okay. On the right-hand side would be your acronym or mnemonic. So here we've got our SMEDI, so that matches up. So the idea is you're working away. If you forget, you have a look at your acronym or mnemonic that you might have, and then you go back and you complete the syllabus there. All right. This is another part 4, marketing strategies. And again, segmentation, differentiation, you just go through and you fill that out. I've been doing this for years, and students find it, the most effective way of revising the syllabus and knowing the sections. Now, this solely is not going to get you through the HSC, but it provides you with a very good foundation to answering questions. And then with the further study, you're locking in the detail, I guess, of each of these components. Over on this side, again, we've got our strategies. Now, you might look at 7 Ps or PEG. And again, you can make up your own acronyms, mnemonics, and as I said, there's some around. If you search on the internet, there's lots of them around. In terms of mnemonics, so we looked at more acronyms there. This is one that's credited to the Apple case study, and your schools might be using those and teachers, but it's a very good publication, the Apple case study, and within that, there's some advice around mnemonics. And there's one really good example here, and it's referred to as a mnemonic because it takes the first letter, but it puts it into a sentence, and sometimes those sentences might not make sense, and probably, if they don't make sense, there's more chance of you remembering it. This is one from operations. So we've got operations influences, and that's the only in Greenland. They quietly chew gum leaves every Christmas. So the idea is that each of these letters is a component of the syllabus. Now there's 17 syllabus sections in total, okay? So that's the 4 from each topic, which is 16, plus the effectiveness one. So really, these are 17 silly sentences or mnemonics combination of acronyms, etc., that you can remember. So it's a really important memory technique. You can put these on palm cards, revise them, etc. So I'll just show you how it looks. So there's the syllabus operations influences, and then we've got, so the green, only in Greenland they quietly chew gum leaves every Christmas. Okay, so that's there. And then each of these letters is a syllabus term. Now I like this, and this was done in the Apple case study book. It gives you extra words. I'm a big believer in, if you're going to learn a key term like globalization, obviously the definition, but what are some other key words that go with it, like global web, like economies of scale, etc. We're looking at technology. So technology is about innovation and research and development, etc. Okay, so big believer in keywords attached to these main syllabus areas to help you answer questions. So there's an example, and you might be able to come up with some of those yourself. All right, let's have a look at past papers in a bit of detail. We mentioned this before. So what we're saying here is that you can learn all that content and you could know the syllabus off by heart, but if you don't know how to answer HSC questions and what to expect in those questions, it's really going to limit the marks that you're going to receive in the exam. Okay, so the idea here is by doing past papers, you know, it's the easiest way to find out what you don't know by looking at different questions. It gives you an idea of what marks to expect. So if you're doing a whole paper, for example, and I know you do that in the trial exam, it gives you an indication of how you're traveling. And this notion that it takes pressure off exams because it gives you that confidence that you've prepared well. You know, I often hear students say, "Oh, I've seen that question before," and they probably have, or variations of it, because they've done many past papers and they've exposed, you know, their learning to different exam papers and questions. All right. So in terms of your past paper questions, you know, I'm a big believer in timing it. So it's not like you're given the past paper and you start doing some questions and then you stop, or then you might look things up. No, it's definitely a timed event in terms of getting a business report, sitting down for 40 minutes and writing that question out and completing that question to the best of your ability. All right. The next thing is that you need feedback. So, you know, you need to have strong relationships with your teachers, and your teachers will work hard for you, particularly if they can see that you're working hard. You know, they'll give you the feedback and the guidance that you need. And from that feedback, you can highlight what areas you might be weak in. So it might be content based, or it might be misreading the questions or not addressing the verb. And then, you know, you can strengthen those weaknesses. I remember a student a few years ago that when I used to comment and give feedback on his essays, sorry, on the reports, I would say, well, you haven't really used the stimulus that well, and you haven't addressed the verb in this part. And he would write that onto the top of his next report, and then making sure that that's conscious for him, that that's where he needs to improve on. So again, it's definitely a way of working out what you need to improve on and what your strengths are. All right, we move on now to the Glossary of Key Terms. And the Glossary of Key Terms are the directive verbs that guide you in how to answer questions in the exam. So I like to look at questions in two parts. Okay, so in answering any question, you know, exams are trying to work out, you know, what content that you know and how you're going to apply that content. So what you write and how you write it. So think about that. So the what you write is the content around the question, so the syllabus area and the specific terms, and the how you write it is addressing the verb. Okay, so when you're writing a short answer, a report, a case study, lots of times you look at the question and students just go in there and start writing. Okay, but you really do need to take note of what specifically are they asking me? What content do I need to address? And how am I going to use that content? Do I need to justify a strategy, or do I need to evaluate? Okay, so that's pretty important, because that's going to guide you in terms of the structure of the answer, and the way that you're going to treat or manipulate the content. So understanding the directive verb is very important. So you should be looking at underlining that, okay, or highlighting that, or writing down. So if you see the word justify, you might write above that, oh, that means I need to give reasons, and I need to give detailed reasons on why I should use that strategy, for example. Lots of explain questions come up, and still, students are struggling in making that connection of that cause and effect. So here is a list of the main glossary of key terms for business studies. The list is not exhaustive, but you obviously can go to the NESA website and get the full list of those terms there. What's in front of you starts with some lower order verbs. So what we mean by lower order verbs, more sort of knowledge type verbs and comprehension. And we move into higher order verbs. So typically an outline question in a short answer would only be worth a couple of marks. Same with describe and calculate. But once we start moving into the discuss and explain, we're probably looking at more marks, because they're term verbs in the degree of how you need to answer those. And then we've got the higher order verbs, or the higher order skills in analysing and examining, justifying, evaluating, etc. Okay, so I can't stress enough, and I'm sure your teachers are working on these with you constantly, about how to address these verbs in the question. At the end of the day, like, a lot of these verbs, when you look at the marking criteria, like for example, if it's an evaluate 20-mark case study question, and you haven't made judgment at all throughout your answer, you're probably not going to get more than a C response there. So if you're going to access the higher marks in your questions for these assess and examine and analyze, etc., you really do need to do what that verb is asking you to do. Okay, and that's just another outline of some of those. There's just a little bit more detail on some of those verbs there. So you can pause this later on and have a look at those and make sure you know those. What's been happening as well is the directive verbs are not the only words that they're using in exams. And you might see words like how and how can, or why, why does this happen? Okay, so just be prepared for these non-traditional directive terms as well. Here's an example of the how can. So how can different sources of funds help a business achieve its financial objectives? So that's from the 2002 HSC. So you're looking at it and saying, okay, how? That means to show. I need to demonstrate. I need to create some sort of link. I need to give reason. So there's it might seem a simple how question, but there's a bit to that. Like, that was a 20-mark case study question in 2012. So I've just got a little snippet here of how you might answer that. So by using leasing, okay, so how? We're doing it by using leasing, and Qantas is able to purchase its new fleet of A380 Airbuses, which will lead to more customers on the flights, increasing sales and ultimately profits. Okay, so how can they, a different source of funds? So a source of funds is leasing to achieve its objectives. So the objectives of sales and profits. So by having, or by investing in the new A380 Airbuses, they're a larger plane. Obviously, you can get more customers on those flights. Therefore, you can sell more tickets and hopefully make more profit. So again, this how can question is really asking you to show and demonstrate, give reasons, etc. And the same with the why. Why is market research effective in achieving the marketing objective. So why? It's give reasons, it's inquire into. So don't be fooled that it's a basic word and not writing much on it. You really still do need to get the detail in those answers. All right, and that's just a visual on what I was talking about in skills. So the lower order questions like the list and outline and describe have low marks attached to them. As we move through, we can see things like examine, discuss, and then we move up to the higher order verbs there of evaluate and assess. Okay, and they tend to be the 20 mark type questions there. All right, so we move on to now resources and where you can access some help, etc. So the NESA past HSC papers, that's something that you obviously would know and have access to. If you can get hold of Catholic school past papers and independent trial papers, and I know they're floating around, acehsc.net. Okay, this over here is a website. They've just fixed that up recently. Students are posting exam papers, etc., on there, some of them with answers, etc., as well. So you should have a look at that. They've got study notes and a collection of resources, and they're all free. The NESA sample answer booklets, these are the workbooks. They're not produced every single year, but they just give you typical answers to past papers that students have written for those particular questions. Now, I've seen them in libraries. Your teachers might have them as well. So you might ask your teachers for those or go to the library and borrow those. Cambridge HSC checkpoints have revision books, and again, they're probably in your libraries as well. And there's an app there that you can test yourself. Matthew Parsons for business studies and economics has graciously opened up his online learning website. He's a teacher that with the COVID-19 has generously allowed access to his videos and revision quizzes, etc. And they're really good. So especially if you don't have other online learning means, that's a really good one. Art of Smart, another good website if you haven't seen that, in all your subjects. Revision, past questions, breakdown of exam analysis, pretty good material on that site, and that's all free. And the NESA quiz site. So basically, if you go to that link there, you type in your subject like business studies, and it will randomly select past HSC multiple choice questions. That's a really good technique. I've got 15 or 20 minutes, go onto the site, have a look at some multiple choice questions, get the immediate feedback there. All right, and finally, the Qantas case study book. There's the Apple case study I mentioned in this video as well. That's a link to an online case study for Apple, but your libraries and that now do have the Qantas case study book. It's a very thorough treatment of the syllabus in reference to Qantas, and there's some other ones floating around. The Excel study guide, and again, these are in libraries. As a study guide goes, they're pretty good books to just to look at how other people have presented the information that you might have learned in class. If you're a video learner, and hopefully so with watching this particular video, there are some videos around on YouTube. Marco Cimino here has a good YouTube channel in which he has all the HSC videos there, breaks down different components of the course. HSC Hub, that's a paid prescription there. I know some schools have that. They're sort of shorter videos that you can have, but you have to pay for those. So accessing these resources, and again, if your school's giving you lots of good resources and access to that, these might be some just other additional ways to to get access to resources. All right, so that brings us to the end of our first video. So hopefully, you've got an idea of how to prepare better for the exam and some techniques, etc. Watch video 2 as that breaks down the exam specifically with past papers, etc. So take care and good luck with your HSC exam in business studies.